You all look so nice.
New girl. The reality is that Chad's role is meant to uphold Troy's story. The way they cope with unfair circumstances doesn't matter. So sure, the Black best friend increases the number of Black characters on screen, but it's become one of the only ways Black people get representation. And Black people deserve to be written with the same depth, range, and necessity as our favorite white characters. And Filipinos deserve the same in the face of greater Asian representation. Like Hollywood, if you really want to let go of your racist portrayals of Asians, maybe stop casting Filipinos as every ethnicity but Filipino. I mean, to bring it back to High School Musical, Gabriela Montez is a Mexican-American character played by Vanessa Hudgens, a Filipina actress. Miranda Sanchez and Lizzie McGuire, Lulu in True Jackson VP, Blaine Anderson in Glee, Nadine in The Edge of 17. All non-Filipino characters played by Filipino actors. And this list barely scratches the surface. People of color aren't interchangeable. And doing this tells Filipinos that we aren't worth stories of our own. Despite all of the progress, Asian representation won't be better until Hollywood normalizes true authenticity. Filipino actors playing Filipino characters showcasing real Filipino culture. A popular example of great representation would be the CW's Emmy Award-winning show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It goes beyond creating Josh Chan, the first Filipino lead in an American television show. While the show wasn't about the fact that Josh was Filipino, the showrunners actively honored his ethnicity with every decision they made. Not only is most of Josh's family portrayed by actual Filipino-Americans, but Filipino writer Rene Gube was crucial in making sure that all of their references were authentic. When Gube pointed out that the dinuguan for the infamous Thanksgiving episode began to look like carnitas after sitting in the sun all day, the executive producer slowed down production to fix the dish. Whoa, right? Giving Filipinos the kind of quality representation we deserve often comes from behind the camera, by hiring Filipino filmmakers to take on the roles of director, producer, writer, and more. Lingua Franca follows the story of an undocumented Filipina trans woman who needs to secure a green card to stay in America. Yellow Rose tells a different story, one of a Filipina who pursues her country music dreams while dealing with the deportation of her undocumented mother. Bobby Rubio's Float premieres Disney's first Filipino-American character and is a love letter to Rubio's son, who is on the autism spectrum. Filipinos have a diverse culture and history, The fact that we have similarities to other cultures as well as differences unique to us allow our stories to feel familiar to other communities, yet new at the same time. So, who's finally going to make a medical drama with a realistic representation of Filipino nurses? Let's see a family live in a house with more than 2 generations in it. And I'm tired of friends in sitcoms not giving each other pasalubong when they come back from vacations. Filipino representation in Hollywood is a two-way street. It requires more Filipinos having the opportunity to act, produce, or direct for the big screen, to be in the writer's room, to pitch our stories and have them greenlit. But most importantly, it also means that us Filipinos at home show up. We need to start paying attention to the successes we already have. Manny Jacinto in The Good Place, Sari Arambulo in AP Bio, Eugene Cordero in Tacoma FD, Nico Santos in Superstore, because that's how we get Hollywood to listen. Watch the new shows by Filipinos when they release. Show your support for Filipinos in Hollywood, and keep the conversation going. Hollywood is like Halo Halo. It's a mix of diverse stories and people, and it won't be long till Filipinos are part of that too.
Thank you to Kumu for sponsoring this episode. Kumu is the top social app in the Philippines where you can live stream, play live games, and even shop online. And there's no better Filipino representation than on this app, where you can meet Filipinos from Australia, to the Middle East, to the Philippines, and back to America. Download the app and let's continue these conversations on live stream.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Wow, what an amazing and insightful video from our friends at One Down Media, and such a great way to kick off tonight's discussion. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's panel discussion on Filipinx representation in the media. I'd like to extend a thank you to the Philippine Consulate General in Honolulu and the East-West Center Participants Association International Women's Group for organizing tonight's enlightening discussion. And hello to the audience joining us tonight. Thank you for being a part of this important discussion. And of course, a special welcome to our amazing panelists tonight. To kick us off, panelists, if we could go around and introduce ourselves to the audience. If you could give us a quick introduction about who you are and the work that you do. Annalisa, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, thanks, Unica. Hey, everybody. My name is Annalisa Burgos, and I actually am a news anchor and reporter here at KITV4 Island News. Before that, I was in the Philippines. I worked for ABS-CBN as an anchor for the morning show ANC. On ANC, it's called Early Edition. And before that, I was in Singapore doing the morning show there. So I've lived all over the world. I'm originally from LA, but I've been a journalist for more than 20 years. And I've made it a point to really tell different perspectives from, the Filipino diaspora. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for joining us. Jeff, if you want to go next.
Sure. Thank you, Unica. Hi, guys. My name is Jeff Horig. I'm a writer, director, producer based in Honolulu. And we do a variety of things, but I think the thing that I'm best known for is Waikiki PD, which is a comedy. It's a web series as well as a feature film. And we have a new movie coming out this Christmas.
Awesome. Thank you. Kimmy, why don't you go next?
Hi, sure. Hey everyone, what's up? Kimmy Bamalero here, originally from Kaneohe. Aloha. I'm an actor. I've been a professional actor now for over 20 years. I actually got my first big break when I was 17, fresh out of high school with Miss Saigon. I think most of you have probably heard of that musical. And then continued my musical theater journey with Mamma Mia, the original Broadway cast in New York. And most recently moving back home and working on Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum PI as Dr. Noelani Kunha. And my creative projects on my own are running the Hawaii Comedy Festival. We just completed our 6th year this year. virtually. Also, Improv Hawaii is a big passion of mine, and working on a website right now, or an app called Actors HI, which is designed to elevate local creatives, specifically actors. So I'm an only child. I'm very busy, and I'm a proud Filipino-American.
Awesome. Thank you. Adara, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's great seeing everybody here. I'm a journalist and I help with the media of the Church of Christ, and primarily I help with producing content for a lot of our Christian lifestyle shows, primarily for the Einzigiving show, where we go into the communities and do a lot of features about people who are doing community services and stuff like that. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lelaine, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Yunika. Hi, everyone. My name is Lelaine Ignau. I'm a multimedia journalist. I'm a reporter for the Filipino channel's Balitang America news program. I'm also a radio host at KNDI 1270 AM, and I'm a writer for the Phil-Am Courier. So my platform as a journalist is really to elevate Filipino-Americans and Filipinos in the community, their stories. And I also have a side project called Pusong Filipinx the Market, where I uplift and showcase Filipino creatives and small business owners here in Hawaii.
Awesome. Amazing. What an amazing, diverse cast of professionals representing all aspects of the media landscape. So thank you guys for joining us. And my name is Unica Escalante. I'm an associate editor at NMG Network and tonight's moderator. Awesome. So tonight's discussion is a meaningful one, and I think one that is near and dear to my heart and to the hearts of all our panelists tonight. And it's an important one, particularly with the state the media landscape is in today, both in the United States and in the Philippines. And it's this question of who gets to tell our stories, and the power that Filipinx media makers in particular hold in addressing the lack of Filipino-American representation throughout all forms of media. So let's kick it off with tonight's first question. What is our role as Filipinx media makers in telling our community stories? Jeff, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think this is a great question. For me, I think that one, we can't wait. We shouldn't wait for permission from Hollywood to tell our stories. We don't have to. I believe that we have the skills, talent, knowledge, and even the gear and the equipment to tell our own stories. I'm not saying that we can't do groundbreaking work like Kimmy is doing and getting into those spaces, but what I am saying is I don't think we should wait. The other thing that I sort of think about this question is I think that Hollywood, they have the tendency to make things by committee. They're risk averse. So my thought is, and even in that video that we saw right before we started the panel, was that when you have people that are risk averse, that are creating things by committee, you tend to maybe water down things, or you might get the story wrong. And for me, just the path that I'm pursuing and the path that I think that I recommend is that we try and tell our stories ourselves. Again, we have the gear, the knowledge, the skills, and the talent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a filmmaker and as a writer, you're somebody who is behind the scenes, right? Who is actually actively out there telling our stories. And Kimmy, as somebody who is in front of the camera, how do you address this question? What is our role as Filipinx media makers?
You know, that video that you folks showed in the very beginning, I'd seen it before, and it's so fantastic. I mean, it really hits everything that I think we're talking about today, right? And it's just being Filipino and being not hiding it and not assuming that, oh, no one's going to understand what being Filipino is. And I mean, again, I've been in this business for a long time, and I've had that question come up before. You know, like, you're Filipino? Oh, I don't. What do you mean? Is that Asian? You know what I mean? Oh, but you're from Hawaii, so you're Hawaiian. So I think making it living and telling our stories the way we know them. I mean, I grew up here in Hawaii, and I was never ashamed to be Filipino because, you know, our cultures are all mixed, and we all know what it is to have a Filipino family, and nobody, even if they weren't Filipino in my school, was ever weirded out by lumpia. If anything, you were weirded out if someone brought a bologna sandwich. You know what I mean? So I think it's telling our stories the way we know it too. I mean, Jeff brought up a good point of sometimes we're scared that we're going to tell it wrong, but there's so many different stories of a Filipino-American, of a Filipino to be told, and it's all important because there's someone out there that's going to connect with you, you know? And it wasn't until I moved to the mainland that I met some other Filipino-Americans in the business that were like, yeah, you know, I've been in this business a long time, and I changed my last name because no one knew what Fernando was. You know, they were like, but you're not Spanish, you look Chinese. And they're like, okay. You know, and these are friends that were like on big shows, you know. Dee Dee Magno never changed her name. She was, you know, in the new Mickey Mouse Club. Jenny Kwan, that's not her real last name, you know. It's Fernandez, I think, or Fernando, you know. So I think, again, like they said in the video, just our responsibility of being the Filipino that we are, and also within our own community and our own culture, accepting that everybody has their own stories and their own journeys that they'd like to share. The one thing that I would say is maybe for me, I would always feel like I wasn't Filipino enough. You know, like when I was on this kids TV show called High Five, I would get approached at like the airport, you know, when we were on tour, and be like, oh, you're Filipino. And they'd start speaking Tagalog to me, and I wouldn't understand, and then immediately would be shunned. You know what I mean? Like I was not cool enough anymore. So I think it's also that. It's just like understanding, hey, we're all, you know, I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm very proud of my culture, and I'm always learning, and I'm open to it. I've never been ashamed. And yeah, just telling our stories the way that we know it, and being comfortable and confident in supporting each other.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this question of what is the Filipino experience and who is the Filipino identity comes up again and again whenever we talk about Filipino representation. And I think, like you pointed out, Kimmy, it's important to remember that it's such a wide array of Filipino experiences and Filipino identities, and we shouldn't be afraid to express our Filipino-ness just because we feel like we're not Filipino enough, you know? And for the journalists on the panel, Adara, Lelaine, and Annalisa, you know, coming from the other spectrum of the media landscape, how do you tackle this idea of media makers and telling our stories the way we want them to be told? If anybody just wants to jump in. Annalisa, do you want to tackle the question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm unique in the sense that I work for mainstream media, and it's a public broadcaster. So we have our own unique challenges. And even when I was working at a network, I often am the only Filipino on staff, or just representing, you know, a whole culture is challenging, because then people look at me like, oh, you're the Filipino, you should know everything about the Filipino culture and what's happening in the Philippines and stuff like that. So that's one aspect of it. But then as a journalist in mainstream news, there's competing stories that I have to fight for, right? So trying to get more Filipino voices, that's challenging, because I think most people just don't want to share personal information about what they're going through, especially in my field, because it's news. So usually it's negative sometimes, you know, if there's like a crash or COVID, for example, right now. There's a lot of survivors of COVID-19 right now, but it's very difficult for me to find people who want to share that journey, that story, because they're afraid of, you know, shame or to be judged, or the community is so small. So I think my perspective is more, how do I get more Filipinos to actively talk to me. And I know it's about building trust and, assuring them that the story is done fairly and well, and not, and not perpetuate stereotypes that a non-Filipino reporter would perhaps, accidentally do, inadvertently do. So that's one of the biggest challenges I've had as a journalist, and just in general. Again, telling stories that a non-Filipino may not really think is important, or they just don't understand. So I've been actively, the one proud thing I got to do during this whole pandemic was to put tabo in the mainstream. And it was amazing because, when everyone was freaking out about this toilet paper shortage and everyone was lining up, I just remember thinking, there's a bath pail, and I said tabo, and I thought, there are Filipinos in my newsroom. And so I figured, they would know what it is, but even some of the Filipinos didn't know what it was. So I was like, what's this? I was so shocked, actually, because I thought that was just part of anything. Or maybe they did kind of know what it is, but they never used it before. So I think that was kind of eye-opening for me. But I was so proud that I was able to do a story about tabo and how you don't need to rely on toilet paper. And it actually went national. So there we go. That's my contribution to the story of eco-friendly and just common sense when it comes to this. You know what I'm saying? So anyway.
Yeah, amazing. I think, whenever we talk about issues or hurdles, I think sometimes we forget that the solution is within our own culture. Especially, I think that is so hilarious with the toilet paper, and the solution is right in front of you. It's just a tabo. It's in your bathroom floor, So that's amazing. I think a through line that I'm hearing throughout all of your answers is that there are a lot of challenges that comes with producing content that represents our Filipino identity. And Annalisa, you talked about the obstacles that you faced while trying to report Filipino stories. And what are have you experienced any other obstacles in communicating Filipino stories through your medium?
For me specifically, it really just is trying to sell the story to the newsroom, right? Because there's so many other stories that are out there. So luckily here in Hawaii, 1 in 4 people is of Filipino heritage. So I don't think it's that hard of a sell. That's why I think the tabo idea was, kind of accepted. But I don't know if that would have been the case in other newsrooms. I worked in New York. I don't know if New York would have been okay with that. Maybe now, but back when I was a journalist over there, it just depends on the sensitivity of people and their interest. You just kind of have to sell it a little bit harder. And then just again, like I told you, just people opening up is a little bit of a challenge. So, and that's kind of my challenge here as a new person in this community, is making the connections. And, I've met a lot of the community so far. So I know that's really the way to get stories out, and really kind of embedding myself. I kind of hang out in places where I think Filipinos would tell me stuff about what's happening. So that's really the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Lalaine, in your work as a journalist and as somebody who is producing physical spaces for Filipinos to gain representation, have you experienced any obstacles in communicating Filipino stories?
Yeah, definitely. I experienced similar things as Annalisa has, because I remember there have been times where the story was just so close to the person I was trying to interview that they didn't want to share. I remember there was someone whose son actually was, I believe, shot at the Capitol. And I know the person personally, the mother, but because some media outlets portrayed the story incorrectly, when I asked, she was just like, I don't want to. it's too much for me already. I don't want my son's life to be portrayed incorrectly. So it's things like that. So just like what Annalisa said, it's all about being able to create that relationship with others, and make sure that they feel safe and comfortable to talk to you, because it's our responsibility at the end of the day to give the right story, share the right story, and share the truth. So that's one thing that I always try to share with others, is that, you know, this is for the Filipino channel, and this is your time to share your stories. I'm all about being vulnerable, but also speak your truth. That's my biggest thing with my journalism. And with finding people, it's all about just constantly networking. You never know who has a story. Everyone that you meet has some kind of story. It's just trying to figure out what that story is.
Yeah, definitely. I think whenever we try to tell these Filipino stories, there's always this fear of misrepresentation, right? And that comes from this long history from mainstream media of stereotyping Asian Americans and Filipino Americans in particular. You know, we're still being stereotyped today. And Jeff and Kimmy, from your experience in production, how have you guys tried to combat these stereotypes and these microaggressions through your work?
For me, then, there's a couple of things. I think one, in the work that we create, for now, what I'm focusing on is characters that happen to be Filipino or Asian American or Pacific Islander. And then I'm in a couple of different writing groups of just people from different ethnicities and backgrounds and that kind of thing. And when we read each other's work, I'm always looking, I'm trying to look at it through a lens of educating them that you some things lend themselves to being very stereotypical, or those kinds of things. So I'm trying to educate and like open their minds to something beyond the white male experience, kind of a thing. So that's how I'm addressing it at this time.
Yeah. Kimmy, would you like to speak about your experience?
Sure. How are we, sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? It was, how are we combating these stereotypes?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Through your
okay.
work, how, whether it's microaggressions or stereotypes that are, you know, being perpetuated in the media, how are you combating those obstacles?
Yeah, again, I think we're just sharing our stories. You know, we're not trying to force anything but our experiences with, you know, we bring out a group for Hawaii Comedy Festival called Filipino AF. And if you know what that second part means, then basically it's an all Filipino American comedy troupe. They do sketch, they do stand up. They're hilarious. And what's interesting about their story, and I actually interviewed Joe Coy for Honolulu Magazine a few years ago, and we talked about this, is, you know, his, of course, you know, you hear him and he's talking about his Filipino mother, but there are still, at the end of the day, you're talking about a mom. You know what I mean? A mom from in any culture. You know, there's so many cultures where a mom will, even if it's not Vicks that she's going to rub on you, you know, and think that's going to cure everything. It just might be she thinks lemon juice is the cure. It's just that, so it really is, I think, the way for me anyway, again, because I grew up in a place that had so many cultures, and we were never kind of like shocked at anything that was Filipino, or like even the term Asian American is interesting to me, and I've only recently gotten used to it because, here in Hawaii we don't say, oh, they're Asian American, we say they're Filipino or they're Korean or they're Japanese, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's sharing our stories the way that we know them, and not hiding that we're Filipino. We're not Filipino AF, again, it's a big show, and it's all Filipino American comedians and writers, but and there are a lot of Filipino jokes in there, of course, but they're not forced. You know, I don't think anyone gets together and says, okay, what are some Filipino jokes we're going to tell today? You know, that just happens to come up because that's just our lives. That's our childhood. That's our journey. You know, I mean, for like Hawaii Five-O and Magnum, I play a character named Noelani Cunha, right? And her last name, I looked it up, is actually Portuguese, but she's still Filipino. Like in my head, we never got to explore her backstory and ethnicity through the 5-0 timeline. Maybe we'll do it someday in Magnum, hopefully. But she is Filipino because there's no way to hide that she's not, you know, even though it's never brought up. To me in my head, she's half Filipino, you know, and my real life father got to play her father on an episode once, and that made it even more solid that, you know, here's some Filipino faces up in here right now, like there's no denying this. And also, you know, whenever you're on set, you can have these conversations, you know. There is a line in one of the episodes where her mother, Noelani's mother, comes up to her and she says, "I'm so proud of you, my ipo," right? My sweetheart in Hawaiian, right? Because it's Hawaii Five-0. And I approached them and I said, "Hey, can we do a couple takes where she says, mahal?" You know, just want to throw it out there, you know, and because, and I explained to them, this is part of my culture. She is Filipino, and they were totally open to it. You know what I mean? So, so yeah, I think it's being comfortable and not being scared. Like, oh, you know, I don't know if it's gonna be okay, but you know, I'm Filipino, and you know, just be confident and be true to yourself, I guess is what it is, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And a quick reminder for the audience that's joining us tonight, at the end of the panel, we'll be having a Q&A with the panelists. So if you had any burning questions that you wanted to address to them, go ahead and drop it into the chat and we'll make sure to get to them. Thank you. And yeah, I think the magic that comes from that kind of representation, especially when it's in mainstream media, is that we get to feel seen. I know that that's something that I personally experienced when I watched Josh Chan, played by Vincent Rodriguez, on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and also written by Filipino-American, is the experiences that he had were so niche and so relevant to my personal experience, you know, with the Thanksgiving episode where they had like their whole extended family and they had like the long table with like just a bunch of dinuguan and palabok and everything. And I was just like, that is my experience. And as a Filipino American, seeing that in mainstream media really reminds me that I am a part of this national landscape, you know. And so there is good to Filipino representation, but also sometimes there is bad because it can perpetuate negative stereotypes if it is told incorrectly. And so Adara, perhaps you could answer this next question. What is one misconception about Filipinx that you encounter frequently and that you hope to change? And conversely, what is one positive experience that you would like to promote?
As far as my professional career is concerned, I haven't been able to meet upfront those stereotypes because I'm just fortunate to be around people who have the same values and values for Filipino culture. But I could say personally, just because I'm born and raised here in Hawaii, from Kalihi. I went to Moalo High School with Unica, and coming from a community where there's so many Filipinos and, you know, the stereotypes are already perpetuated and it's normal. And only up until the point when you get to the higher education level, that's where you realize and you step back and you say like, oh, this isn't all right. This isn't okay. You know, like Filipinos don't have to be, they don't have to be perpetuated in this way. You know, we don't have to put ourselves down in order to be able to fit in with everybody. And there are so many things to be proud of. So I guess what I could say is that the positive aspect to all of this is that I was able to meet a lot of people in education and in the my professional career who have those values and are putting forth those issues at hand and doing something with their platform. So for me personally, I do church news and a lot of lifestyle shows, and the news that I produce are more on the feature side. And I guess the positives I can find to this is that using every opportunity that I can to give a voice to Filipinos and addressing problems. So for me personally, an issue that I always brought up, whether it was my undergrad or in my work, if I had the chance to do a story, was to talk about Filipino history and curriculum in our public school systems. So for me, I was fortunate enough to have a mom who was really proud of being Filipino. She taught me the history and everything. And I love being Filipino, and I couldn't understand why it was so hard for my friends to be proud about being Filipino. So, so when I was able to finally get a platform that would give me that space to produce something, you know, that's something that I wanted to take full charge and full charge on. And so we're creating a documentary that is featuring a Filipino PhD student. Her name is Shannon Cristobal. I think she's here. And we are pretty much covering her life story of being an immigrant and working her way through the educational system, and you know, getting to where she's at, and addressing the issue of not having that representation in education. And kind of going back off what we were talking about the struggles of covering these type of stories, is that for me, it's a lot of uncharted waters, because you know, there's not that many stories that cover these issues. And being us in the media, we're stepping into this new forefront, and we are having this opportunity to address these issues, these problems that aren't really talked about. So I guess the pros and cons is really just, you know, trying to navigate and feeling your way through it, and like learning as much as you can, as much as possible.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And Lalaine, in your work as a journalist, has there been a misconception about Filipinx that you encounter frequently? And then also, what is one perspective on the Filipinx population that you would like to promote?
I think for me personally, when I'm asked about what I do for my career, I'm always asked, "Oh, are you a nurse?" And it's kind of like, we're more than just nurses. We're more than just medical professionals. And I'm not saying that to talk down on those, because of course, even more so during this time, they are very much so needed during this pandemic. And we need to take the time to really appreciate them. But I think growing up, it's no secret that many of us deal with, you have to be a nurse, you need to be a doctor, you need to be an engineer, etc., etc. I think one thing that I really want people to understand is we're more than just that. And I did a lot of reflecting in the last few years. In order for us to survive in the Philippines here, so many people do side hustles just to make a living. We have that entrepreneurial spirit to ourselves too, just so that we can make ends meet, and so that we can support our families. And so I think that's one positive thing that I really want people to understand, is that we're more than just medical professionals, and to highlight those achievements as well. So that we can break those stereotypes of what it looks like to be Filipino.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you know, I can't count how many times I've been asked whether I have an auntie who is a nurse or an uncle who's an engineer. You know, there's always that stereotype. And I think part of the reason why we're having this discussion tonight is to promote a wider range of representation for Filipinos, you know, so that we're not just pigeonholed into this one identity. And so, Annalisa, how can I'm gonna volley this question to you, but in your experience, how can we as Filipinx media makers change the narrative about Filipino-Americans so that it's reflective of who we really are?
Well, I guess it's just about getting into key roles that dictate, you know, what's being decided. So like I mentioned, even with how many Filipinos are in the country, there's not that many in media, or sorry, in news, because that's my field, right? And you guys talked about how you see a lot of entertainment people maybe in Hollywood starting to come up, but I think in news there's not that many. I know Elaine Quijano is at CBS, but when I'm talking about news, I'm talking about like anchors, like front and center, national. Maybe there are, but maybe they haven't identified themselves openly about being Filipino. That's the thing, right? And so for my industry, I feel like it's constantly just trying to move up, getting into places where I can, or in positions where I can decide what's covered and have a bigger say, because that's really the only way you can have those stories said and have a platform, is if you are part of the decision making. Right now most of the news directors out there, not our station is obviously in Hawaii, we have more diversity here, but like on the mainland, a lot of the news directors are still old white men, right? And a lot of producers are still, of the Caucasian, right? There's just not enough diversity out there, but it's slowly changing. I know you mentioned when you were growing up, I actually not growing up, you are watching shows right now that have Filipino leads. I didn't have that. I didn't watch it. I didn't see any of that. I mean, I had Rufio, right? That's what I had when I was growing up. And I know now I'm seeing a lot more Filipino faces, and that's great. I mean, for the longest time, Andrew Zimmern kept saying, oh, Filipino food's the next, Thai food. And that was years and years ago. Finally, we're getting that. But yeah, so I think I'm digressing. The whole point is be in positions that are decision making. I personally agree with what Lelaine said about, we're pigeonholed into the nurse. I mean, when I was in Singapore, I was the maid, because all they knew is, Filipinos are maids. And, they couldn't believe that I was an anchor in their TV market. They were like, wow, ooh, that's interesting. And your English is so great, and it's like, you have an accent. I'm like, what? So anyway, but these are just some of the challenges. And I think I look young also. So that also is a I always get mistaken for like the intern or the entertainment reporter. So it's kind of like, I kind of have to prove myself a little bit harder to get credibility and to get respect and to be noticed. And I think that's just part of, trying to break stereotypes and increase diversity in newsrooms. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and thank you for pointing that out, Annalisa. But in the last couple of years, we've really seen this sea change in representation for Filipinos in mainstream media. Kimmy, perhaps you could shed some light on this, but what do you think has contributed to more Filipinos being represented in the mainstream?
Gosh, I think there may be just more of us out there now, and people are just more open. I mean, Manny Jacinto is a great example, and Eugene Cordero, who's a dear friend of mine. They're great examples of these mainstream Filipino actors who aren't playing the nurse, you know what I mean, or playing the housekeeper. They're like, there was an article, I can't remember who put it out, with Manny Jacinto, about how it was so important, his role not only as a Filipino-American but as an Asian American actor, where he's playing the dude. I don't know if anyone's familiar with NBC's The Good Place, but Manny Jacinto's character, he's stupid, he's like a frat boy, you know what I mean, he plays video games all day long, and to see a face like that on your screens, and I think it just happens fast. Like, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about, like, hey, it's kind of weird that you're not a nurse, or you're not an engineer or post office person. You know what I mean? We don't say that. So I really think it's social media, it's the internet, that a lot of work is just getting thrown out there. You know what I mean? One comedian that we bring out here all the time, J.R. de Guzman, if you don't know him, he's hilarious. Check him out. But now they just put stuff out there. So things are getting constantly shared. Or what about Che? Che, Tita Che, right? Even going way back in the day to Happy Slip. You know what I mean? I really think it's because we have, we have a great device right in our pocket that there's no excuse now for our stories to not be out there, and there's also no excuse for any creative, anybody who's in a position to hire, to cast, to create roles for us. There's no excuse for them to not know who or what we are. You know what I'm saying? Back in my day, again, like I would always have like, well, you don't look Asian enough, and it's like, well, you know what I mean? I don't know what I can do about that because Filipino just wasn't a thing. So I think we're seeing more of it now because of all the content that's out there. And the more it's in your face, the more we keep creating, the more again we keep sharing our stories. You can't have an excuse. Then you're just stupid. You know what I mean? You're just stupid, and you're not doing a very good job of your research, or I don't know what you're not reading. But if you don't know what a Filipino is or where the Philippines is, then you crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I think
Can I add
that
to
is.
that just a little bit?
Sorry. Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
yeah, it's sorry. It's just I just wanted to add that for Manny's character on the Good Place, the other thing I wanted to highlight is that he is also a sex symbol, and he's like, I haven't watched the most recent season, but the seasons that I did watch, like he had hooked up with two of the main characters on there. That is like for an Asian American male character, they're often castrated, if you will, or made the eunuch where they're not a sexual being. And I think that's like really awesome what the Good Place has done there. And then like just to like add my little 2 cents on this because I'm very passionate about this particular thing about what we can do as media makers, but in particular Filipinx media makers, is I always think about this observation that I had that in before the 1950s, Italians in the United States were seen as dirty immigrants, um, and sort of the low end of the totem pole of immigrants at that time. In the 1970s, filmmakers like Scorsese, Coppola, Sylvester Stallone, they created a mythology around Italians that they were strong, that they would do anything for their family, that they were Italian stallions. And so for me, I feel like whoever's listening, we can create a similar Filipino mythology for Filipinos. And we base it around who we are. We are smart, strong, passionate, talented, beautiful, sexy people. And we deserve a mythology that highlights those things. So uh, when we create stories, we choose what we want to share, and we're not perfect, just like The Godfather or Rocky or whoever it is. And then, like, I mean, like we have a real life Rocky in Pac-Man, and he's a flawed person, and he's got all these kinds of things. But yeah, there's just so okay. Rant over. You can Unica take over again.
No, yeah, thank you, Jeff, for bringing up that amazing point. I think, yes, definitely there is this history of feminization of Asian American men, and that also ascribes to Filipino American men that also, we've experienced that. And I think what you get to is the power that representation holds in widening ideas about who we are. And so, going off of that, there tends to be this misrepresentation of Filipinos, but also a lost history of Filipinos. I think our accomplishments are often left behind by historical narratives. For example, the role of Filipino farm workers in furthering labor rights, or our artistic and athletic accomplishments are often gone unnoticed. And so, Adara, as somebody who creates primarily documentaries about the Filipino community, how have you tried to change the narrative about Filipino-Americans?
I guess my approach to these documentaries are really to highlight the humanity that Filipinos have. You know, everyone has it, but highlighting that particularly in Filipinos, showing that, you know, they're your next door neighbors. They're not just, you know, nurses and whatnot. You know, they're also, you know, musicians, chefs, the teachers and stuff like that. I think that's an important thing that I keep in mind and try to focus on, because I think once we give that voice to that story that often isn't, you know, represented in the media that we see, and we also, you know, talk about the struggles that they go through and whatnot, I think that really helps in really personifying this Filipino-American experience for those who may not be familiarized with it, and really making it normal, you know, so that, you know, eventually, if as more stories like this come along, you know, those stereotypes won't, you know, hold value. It won't hold any weight or meaning, because we have these other stories to look at and these other people to look up to. You know, I'm not saying like there's none out there, but, you know, putting that more in the main media, the mainstream media, is really important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Thank you. The next question really focuses on a call to action for us as media makers. And Lalaine, for you as somebody who is creating physical spaces for Filipino representation, how do you think we can reach out to the Filipinx community, particularly among the youth who might feel isolated in their struggle for their Filipino heritage?
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about constantly networking. Um, we have that thought of the whole crab mentality, but I think as long as you really focus on wanting to give greater idea of being more passionate about your Filipino identity, being thinking of others and reminding them that this is for the greater good, this is for the future. I think that's what it's all about. Making sure that you reach out to anyone and constantly network that there's things happening. So for example, with Pusong Filipinx, I've created this. Originally, it was actually my journalism portfolio, just wanting to see what people are doing on a regular basis to embody their Filipino identity. And so when I created the market, it was all about thinking about how can we bring in people in a space that's safe and kind of a starter as a way to kickstart how to learn more about your Filipino identity and embody it. So for those who don't understand and don't know about Pusong Filipinx, it really is just a marketplace in hindsight. But all the makers, all the participants are Filipino. And I've developed it in a sense where we have a panel, and that's where the educational piece comes in. And I think that things like this, where it kind of just kickstarts, creates that spark to learn more about the identity, I think that's what would help. And then hopefully being on the optimistic side, that people do take something home with them and want to learn more about their identity.
Yes, thank you. Annalisa, for somebody who has, you know, a pretty big mainstream platform, how do you think we can reach out to the Filipinx community? And maybe if you could, if you have an example of the impact of stories in changing how Filipinx see themselves.
Yeah, so at least for here, you know, I've been here a little over a year, and I'm trying to kind of, like I said, get to know some of the community groups, and reach out to some of the youth. I'd love to kind of work with some of the schools. I don't really know how to do that, but I think it starts with, you know, media literacy, especially from my business, right? Because I work in news. So as we know, Filipinos are like the number one consumer of Facebook and social media in general. And I feel like if we can use that to our benefit, where we're sharing not just silly dances and, you know, funny memes or whatever, but promoting great entrepreneurs, because there's so many great stories out there. I featured that Rise Up entrepreneur uh, from, gosh, I'm totally blanking, but he started this platform to help farmers, rice farmers in the Philippines. And he was, you know, a young person, just very savvy with technology and things like that, celebrating innovation and young people, you know, giving back to the community. So I think for me as a journalist, I'd like to make those connections and those relationships, and I'm working at it. But if anyone, you know, I'm always open to talking to people, and even mentoring people who are really interested in this industry, you know, because we really just need to increase, you know, presence and people that have these diverse backgrounds to be in the newsroom. If this is the field that you want to be in, I mean, it's thankless. It doesn't pay well. But I mean, it's your chance to tell stories, and it gives you an excuse to ask questions from people, you know, like all the leaders, you just can go and ask them anything, right? And you're a journalist. So so I try to do that, right? I try to do some outreach. So maybe I'll try to partner with some schools, and if anyone knows suggestions for how I used to do media training in the Philippines. So for people that want to, you know, pitch their stories and get them onto mainstream media in an interesting way, because press releases don't work. So I think if there's a way to kind of get community groups to give the stories to mainstream in a way that's interesting, maybe we would air it more often. Like, I know we always have these food distribution, you know, things that happen, and Filipinos are like, the Filipino groups are doing that, but I'm trying to get them to get used to giving us that information so we can air it and promote how great the community is doing during COVID. So anyway, any suggestions, feel free to email me. I'm always open to learn more and hear more.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you. So we were going to have a audience Q&A time, but I think there's only one question from the audience. And I know Jeff and Adara, you had already answered this in the chat, but I think it's a great question to kind of give to the whole panel. So from, hold on one second. From grab it. From Evelyn Lena, how do we combat stereotypes about Filipinos and their accents? Jeff, maybe if you wanted to reiterate your answer to the rest of the audience.
Sure. I just said that it's merely a perception, and for example, the French accent is not inherently sexy. It's only because the perception that the French accent is sexy, it's that perception is so pervasive that we all believe the French accent is sexy. So what I suggested in the comments was that we just need to start making media that shows people fawning over Filipinos with Filipino accents, and that's seen as sexy. And like, there is, in my opinion, like proof that Filipinos are sexy. I looked it up the other day because, like, in preparing for this, I'd heard this before, but like, the Philippines has had 4 Miss Universe winners, and like, that's a competition not sponsored or held by and voted on by Filipinos. So that's just one example of how sexy we are. And like, there's just like millions of them. Like, you just look at how beautiful all of these people on the panel are, and like, when we look at ourselves, how beautiful we are. And then I wanted to kind of add about like how we can reach out to the youth. I was someone that was not, I didn't grow up proud being a Filipino. It was only until recently, because I grew up in Chicago. It's like and where I grew up was like white, and Chicago, if you look it up, is it is the most segregated city in the United States. But only recently I started to really own and cherish my Filipino heritage. And like, I think if we share the amazingness, the power, the beauty of our culture, both in like the very broad sense of like, think about how amazing it is to be Filipino. We were conquered by Spain for hundreds of years, as well as imperialized by the United States for like another whatever 100 years, right? Yet, um, unlike half the world who was also conquered by Spain, we retained our Filipino-ness, we retained our culture, we retained our language. That is not by accident. That is because we are that amazing, that we are that strong, we are that powerful. But by the same token, that colonialism has embedded this colonial mentality, and this is not my work. This is I forget the name of this the doctor that came up with this, but um, that colonial mentality uh, puts something in our mind that it makes us ashamed of who we are, and we need to get rid of that. I don't know how we get rid of that, but the only way that I believe we get rid of that is we start creating stories that reflect how amazing we are. And once you start doing that, and once we start sharing those things, it's this mythology, it's this thing that we can all get behind and that we can believe and know that is true about ourselves. And yeah, just keep telling stories. And then like stuff that Kimmy's doing, she does amazing work from like training youth, like young kids, how to tell their stories and like do improv and go all the way through like theater and all these different things. And then like the work that she's doing on Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum PI, and being an example that's like in mainstream media, and then as well as like all the work that the journalists are doing, like helping to champion our stories. And then like whoever you are listening to this, you can help either by telling the stories or supporting those storytellers, whether it's sharing those stories. Kimmy has her improv, I'm sorry, the High Comedy Fest available for sale right now. Like you can go buy that. Like money talks. And it is a way for us to make the stuff. Like it's so important to invest not only your time and energy, but also your money to in supporting work that counts. So, okay, again, rant over, someone else start talking.
Awesome. Amazing. I think that's a great way to end our discussion today. And for anybody who is interested in learning more about post-colonial mentality and how we can combat that, E.J.R. David has a great book called Brown Skin, White Minds. And I feel like that's a great way for people to kind of enlighten themselves about this history of colonialism. And awesome, amazing. Thank you guys for an amazing panel. Thank you, panelists, for coming and giving us your insight. And of course, thank you to the Philippine Consulate in Honolulu for organizing this event. Awesome. I think
Thanks
that
for having
about,
us.
yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Unica. And it's a battle for us to be represented all over. And there's another battle that we should be conquering on Saturday, which is the Battle of the Filipino Organizations. It's the culminating event for Filipino-American History Month here in Hawaii, sponsored by Mystery Maui. And this is in benefit of the Tinala Council over there at the University of Hawaii. University of Hawaii's College of Education. So if you're interested in joining as a team or a solo, just head to philamhistorymonthhawaii.com and register. So hope to see you folks there again on Saturday.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that about wraps it up for tonight's panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.